Okay, so throughout my life, I've dealt with a lot of atheists because I was actually sent to go to public schooling in an area where there were a lot of religious private schools that presumably people from families where they were religious were being sent, and so I was being sent to the secular school because my family couldn't afford to send me to any of those places. And one of the claims or things that I've heard non-Christian people say many, many times over the years is, I don't believe in the Bible. I believe in science, or I believe in what I can see, or I don't believe in God because I've never seen him, or, basically the idea stands on this notion of, I'll believe once I've seen evidence or someone else has, and therefore makes it part of scientific canon. Now, the reason that I take issue with this assumption, and believe me, I used to take this notion extremely seriously when I was younger. I used to be almost tormented by the idea of, oh my gosh, what if I've devoted my whole life to something that is just false? And there's all this evidence that, people are telling me is proving it false. What if it is? And, so I went through periods of my youth where I went through a lot of doubt on this basis. Um, but something I've realized or noticed more recently is that scientific claims change. They change very drastically over time. They change over and over and over again, and they should, because as a lot of people, including atheists themselves, will often point out, science, reacts to the evidence. It responds to the evidence available. Everything science asserts has to be built on evidence or it's bad science. And it's one of the things that a lot of scientific Christians admire about science itself. They like the idea that it is so invested in this pursuit of truth. And for them it's very much, for them, they see the two as being highly compatible as ideologies because they see Christianity as being also about the pursuit of truth. And, so there is this similarity in that both groups will likely take issue with postmodernism and the idea that there is no truth. But, that maybe that's a matter for a separate video. My point is that Christianity itself doesn't make claims in the same manner that science does. It doesn't say, here's this evidence, therefore this is so. It makes claims about things that we typically can't have physical evidence for. It makes spiritual claims, and it makes claims about eternity. And these are things that science can't really speak for because they are not things that you could gather evidence about, really. And so, even if these claims are true, and I personally believe they are, but even like regardless of whether they're true or false, science typically won't be able to tell us this. But even if there were evidence somewhere out there exonerating the Bible completely, the only way we would ever find that is by looking for it, by at least admitting the possibility that that evidence might exist. And again, I don't necessarily believe that everything claimed in the Bible should necessarily leave behind physical evidence. Not everything survives in the archaeological record. Not everything gets fossilized. That is partly why again, new fossils are found all the time that change what we understand about dinosaur physiology. And so it seems like a bad idea to me, at least personally, for me to dismiss everything that I believe and everything that I've experienced about Christianity based on claims made by people who I, in many cases, haven't even met. And they say, I'm a scientist, I have this expertise, I've, done these studies. And, I don't disrespect them because I understand that they have taken the time. But at the same time, I think, well, do I really want to change my whole life based on their claims alone? And the truth is, I don't. I think it's a bad idea for somebody to do that because you're basically surrendering all of your, your beliefs about the world, your beliefs about yourself, your beliefs about everybody else to what someone else is saying instead of actually looking at your own life experiences. And, my experiences of Christianity and of the God of the Bible are enough for me within myself to believe. There are people who would say, well, that's anecdotal, that I can't accept that. Well, don't accept it from me either. I'm not saying you should become a Christian based on my claims. Don't. But if you are really of the mindset of, 100%, I'm going to believe the claims of a contemporary scientist over some other person who made religious claims, can you see what I'm saying? In either case, you're sort of having to trust what that person is saying. And yeah, in either case, I don't believe that's enough on its own to risk your eternal life. I don't see that as being reason enough on its own. And I'm not saying believe on that basis, because there's a lot of people who point out, well, that's a very bad reason to believe, because anybody can threaten you with any ideology saying, well, believe this or you're going to hell for all eternity. And historically, a lot of people have been manipulated to do terrible, terrible things this way. And, again, there's a lot of horrible tragedies that have happened in history through those kinds of threats. Again, if somebody is trying to get you to believe in the Christian God purely by scaring you, I don't think you should listen to that person either. I think the people to take seriously are the people who know how to believe the Bible in a joyful way. The people who not only believe it, but are actually at least largely attempting to live its claims, not just in terms of the commands, but also this essential philosophy of the universe being made by a loving God. Because what I find to be true about a lot of the people who try to make people believe out of fear is that very little of the joy of God is reflected in their life. And so, insofar as that is their own business, okay, but I feel like if you are looking to them as an example of what the Christian life is or should be, I feel like you're going to end up with a very limited picture, to be perfectly honest. And I realize that in saying this, I must sound incredibly judgmental and maybe even pitiless or merciless. Maybe that's true, but even in the Bible, there is the teaching, while we should not judge, there needs to be some awareness that not all leadership is good leadership. That sometimes there are wolves that come in sheep's clothing. I'm not arrogant enough to assume that you'll only find the truth amongst Christians, or that you'll only find the truth amongst non-Christians. I'm not arrogant enough to assume that you'll only find liars amongst non-Christians or Christians. I think you'll find that there is, honesty and dishonesty on both sides. And even within ourselves, I think sometimes we lie to ourselves when we face anything that challenges us and forces us into a place of cognitive dissonance. But just because we face these things and we find ourselves anxious and we find it difficult to break out of that anxiety, it doesn't mean that it's not worth facing. It doesn't mean that it's not worth weathering through. And, I feel like at this point, a large product of the confidence that I have in where I stand comes from the willingness to face those kinds of fears and to look at what is really being said. And what I find is that ultimately everybody is a person, and they can only speak for the evidence that they have available to them. And I don't think anybody who ever sees this video will be any different. I think every single one of us can only discern the truth insofar as we have information available to us. And for that reason, I think it is probably worthwhile to not only question the people around you, but also maybe to give them a chance and to maybe try to hear what they have to say for themselves.